it's Reagan, and today I'm filming one of my favorite videos to film every season, and that is the top 5 books I read this summer. If you're not familiar, I do a seasonal reading and review where I go over every book I read for a particular season, and at the end I pick my top 5 favorite books of that season. This past season, of course, was summer, and I have to say, like, reflecting on all the books I've read, this was definitely my best reading season. I read 6 to 7 books every single month, which was definitely more than I was able to read in the wintertime, and I really loved pretty much every book I read, which was a great feeling. Yes, without further ado, let's just go ahead and start with the month of June. The first book I read for the month of June was The Copper Gauntlet by Holly Black and Cassandra Clare, and I gave this book a 3.75 4 stars out of 5 stars. Then I read the entire Girl of Fire and Thorns trilogy by Rae Carson. First one being Girl of Fire and Thorns, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Crown of Embers, of course also by Rae Carson, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars, and then the last one, The Bitter Kingdom by Rae Carson, which I gave like a 4.75 out of 5 stars. Loved this series. Next up, I read When Dimple Met Rishi by Sandhya Menon, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read Lord of Shadows by Cassandra Clare, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The series is so addicting. From there, we're gonna move on to the month of July. The first book I completed this month was Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars to. Next up, I read Walk on Earth a Stranger by Rae Carson, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars to. Then I read The Disappearances, which I gave a 4.25 out of 5 stars. Then I read Poison Study, which I gave 4.5 stars. Next up, I read First We Were Four by Alexander Suroway, which I gave a 4.25 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read I See London, I See France, which I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now moving into the month of August, the first book I completed this month was The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee, which I gave a 4.5 stars. Next up, I read I Hate Everyone But You by Gabby Dunn and Allison Raskin, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. I read The Thief by Megan Wallen Turner, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Like a River Glorious by Rae Carson, which I gave a 4.25 stars. Then I read Bossy Pants by Tina Fey, which I gave 3.5 stars. Next up, I read Sparks of Light, which I also gave 4 stars. And the last book I completed for the month of August was The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. So those are all the books I read for the past 3 months. Per usual, I will leave links to every wrap-up I have down below, which you can find mini reviews for each of these books. I also have individual reviews for quite a few of these books, which I'll also leave linked down below for you guys if you want more in-depth thoughts. Now I'm gonna go ahead and move into my top 5 books of the season. Luckily for me, I kind of cheated a little bit because one of my tops is a series, but you know, that can't be helped. But as usual, none of these books are any particular order, but let's just get started. First book I feel like I just have to talk about is the Girl of Fire and Thorns trilogy. I marathoned this trilogy back in June, and I absolutely fell in love with this series, this world, this author's writing, and I've since gone on to read 5 books. I read 5 books by Rae Carson this summer, and I just really enjoyed every single one of them. I've done a full series review on this, which I will leave linked down below, where I kind of give my overall thoughts to the entire series, as I have a lot of thoughts about this particular book series. This follows our main character Eliza, and for her whole life Eliza has always felt kind of ostracized from her family and from her kingdom, as she is the bearer of the Godstone. This holds significant religious significance within her world and society. At the beginning of the first book, she is kind of married off as a pawn, at least she feels this way, to an older man, to another kingdom, to basically finalize a political alliance between her family's kingdom and another kingdom. This story follows Eliza through so much. We follow her grow, kind of come into herself. This is a story about power and just like women and just all sorts of amazing things. This is a fantastic fantasy story that has magic and adventure, and just I can't express to you the amount of character growth that occurs between each of these 3 books. It's quite impressive, and I absolutely love this story. It's so great. I couldn't recommend it more highly. It's just amazing. The next top book that I read this summer has to be Lord of Shadows by Cassandra Clare. I am just trash for this series. Simply put, this is Cassandra Clare's newest series. It's the Dark Artifices series, and as I say every time I talk about this book, yes, you have to read the other ones, or rather, I would definitely recommend you read the other ones before this, as I feel like it just makes the story a lot more rich and just enjoyable that way. I just have to just gush about this a little more. A long while I thought I was falling out of love with Cassandra Clare books, but I just feel like this particular series just really elevates Cassandra Clare's writing to a whole new level. It's a lot more political. I feel like we have a lot more complex storylines and characters, but with all that we have the same addictive writing that we come to expect from Cassandra Clare and love from her. I flew through the storyline. I was at the edge of my seat. I love all the characters. I'm totally invested in the Shadowhunter world, which again, I just wasn't expecting to feel, but it's just so much fun. I'm just so happy that she exceeded my expectations, and I'm just in this fandom. I'm along for the ride, and it's just so much fun. So I had to include this as one of my top books. The next book that's on my list is Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab. This was an incredible book. I just cannot emphasize how amazing Victoria Schwab's writing is. It's dark, it's enchanting, it's beautiful. I am just a sucker for her writing, and the fact that we're just getting so many more books from her in the next upcoming years just excites me to no end. But this particular YA story is dark. It is just so good. This is the sequel to the first novel, This Savage Song, which is a story that is set in kind of a post-apocalyptic, dystopian-esque style world that is torn apart by the occurrence of like violence and sin manifest themselves into monsters that kill people. We follow two characters in the story, Kate, who wants to be evil like her father, and August, who just wants to be human. It's a beautiful story of friendship, companionship, and just like desire to live and be in a better place than you are. The story is dark. I've said that a lot of times. It will really mess with your emotions, but it's so beautiful and just amazing. Victoria Schwab has just such a way with characters and writing that I really just can't emphasize that enough. I always just fall into her stories. They like mesmerize me, and I come out the other side like crying but happy, but crying and emotionally just distraught but happy. It's confusing. This book was absolutely astounding though. The next book that I'm going to mention is The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. Now this book, just right out the gate, is so much fun. This book is absolutely hilarious. This follows our main character Monty Montague, who is a little bit of a rogue. He likes to gamble, he likes to drink too much, he really doesn't like to face any type of familiar responsibility that he kind of has to deal with in terms of running an estate. At the beginning of the story, he is about to head off on his continental tour with his best friend Percy, and it's kind of a bit of a last hurrah before he has to face adulthood and kind of undertake the responsibilities that is expected of him. However, while Monty's excited about this continental journey, he also is a little nervous as he's accompanied by his sister, who he doesn't like very much, and he's also with his best friend Percy, who he is absolutely in love with. This is a story that is just completely off the rails fun. It has a lot of twists and turns that I personally wasn't expecting, and it also has some fantastic representation. As I mentioned briefly in the description, there is a boy-boy romance in this, as Monty is bisexual. There's also asexual representation in this, as well as disability rep, and this story just does a really fantastic job contextualizing all of those things to the time period this is set in, but also makes it incredibly relevant and has amazing dialogue to current day as well. This story is so much fun. It has so much historical flair to it. The parties, the dresses, just everything about it was just such a joy to read. I flew through this book, laughed out loud pretty much the whole time. I just feel like everyone should read this book, okay? The last book that's on my top 5 books of the summer is Poison Study by Marie V. Snyder. Now this was actually a reread for me, and it completely swept me off my feet. I feel like I've been talking about this book a lot on my channel, so I'm gonna keep it brief. This is the first book to Marie V. Snyder's Magic or Study series, and this follows our main character Yelena, who at the beginning of this novel is about to be executed for a crime. However, she is granted clemency if she becomes the king's food taste tester. I did want to quickly say this has trigger warnings for sexual assault and sexual violence. This story is incredible. It's full of magic, political intrigue. It also has a very unique political setting for a fantasy world. It's like a medieval setting, but it also has some communist political flair to it, which I feel like we don't really get very often. I really loved this first book. I'm really excited to see where the story goes from here. I just really loved this story. I feel like this is some like classic YA fantasy that I have been missing, and I found it again, and I loved it. Guys, those are the top 5 books I read this summer. Let me know down below some books you've read recently that you've really loved. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!